After I looked up the author and found out that she is also a COVID denier, makes a little bit more sense. Hey y'all, my name is Nat. I hope you're having a terrific day today, and for this video, we are going to be doing my January wrap-up. Alright, before I get to anything bookish, make sure to hit like and subscribe down below, as well as tell me in the comments how was your first reading month of the year. Started a little rough, but it got better as we went on, thankfully. Before we hop into my reviews though, let's start out by talking about my stats. So at the top, I read 12 books this month, which is fan-freaking-tastic. A solid number to start the year off. Across those 12 books, I read 3,820 pages. That does include converting audiobook hours to pages, but in regard to audiobook hours, I listened to about 68 hours, which is a lot, but that also makes sense with the amount of driving I did this month. My average rating was 3.92 stars, not too bad. Thankfully, I only had one DNF. Then for my genres, I had a pretty diverse breakdown, starting out with 2 fantasy books, 1 horror, 2 manga and 2 mysteries, 1 nonfiction, 3 sci-fi, and 1 thriller. I'm gonna go ahead and say I completed reading a big book because it was literally 2 pages from being 450 pages. So I completed a big book. I did read a manga/comic, and obviously I also read a nonfiction book, which is fantastic. For my series stats, I started 1 series, I continued 4 series, finished out 1, and also DNF'd another. Now we are gonna hop into my reviews, and I'm gonna be going through these in terms of star ratings from the lowest to the highest, but I do want to remind y'all that I am only going to be talking about books in this wrap-up that are not included in specific themed vlogs. My weekly reading vlog books are totally free game, but if it is a themed vlog, that is where you're gonna find a full review and a rating. So jumping right in, first off, unfortunately, I finally got around to a nonfiction book that I was very excited to start, which was The Beauty Myth by Naomi Wolf, How Images of Beauty Are Used Against Women. This is a older nonfiction that sounded very much up my alley because this is a topic I really enjoy reading about. However, I didn't know going in that it is on the older side, so it'll be a bit dated, but I thought there might still be some good points that I could take from it. This was a pretty quick fail because right from the get-go, Wolf comes across like a conspiracy theorist. The way she talks about some of these beauty standards in society makes it seem as though she thinks every single man in the world is having a secret meeting to come up with these ideas in order to keep women down, and that's pretty outlandish. After I looked up the author and found out that she is also a COVID denier, makes a little bit more sense. Do I think the patriarchy does have an influence in beauty standards? Absolutely, but this was just extreme and radical and too much for me. And the biggest shame is there were actually some good nuggets I was pulling from this, but unfortunately they were so overshadowed by the conspiracy feeling. She did in fact have some claims and thoughts that I really agreed with, but it's very hard to push through all of this other crap in order to get those. On top of that, this book is also really overwritten in my opinion. It felt like she was trying to go for a very academic text, but instead she just seems really verbose, and oftentimes her writing comes across a little bit more convoluted with trying to come across like an academic text. There are many studies and stats referenced throughout this, but I already had found 2 that were fairly extreme, which she didn't cite, and a third that was pretty extreme. When I tried to look it up, I couldn't find it. And that's a red flag for me. Before I read this, I had already heard some critiques about it regarding the lack of diversity in the book. And so I did have that thought in the back of my mind when I was reading it. I also almost immediately picked up on it. For example, in the first real chapter I was reading, Work, there were many claims that were brought up that I felt like would have been more realistic and also had more validity if race had been factored into it. Obviously, I can't fully blame Wolf for that because she is going off of other people's studies and stats. She wasn't the one conducting them. But I do think her own biases play a part in the commentary going on around those studies. I'm just so freaking bummed that this was a dud because the idea of this book is really fascinating to me and I love reading about this sort of stuff, but instead, this is gonna go back to half-price books. Next up for Summerween, I picked up 2 Parts Sugar, 1 Part Murder by Valerie Burns. I think this was to complete a book that had a M in the title? Purple on the cover? I'm not really sure, something along those lines. This is a cozy mystery in which we are following this woman who was recently left at the altar, was made a fool of, and in order to kind of showcase to her fiance that she is over him, as well as prove to her father that she can actually take care of herself, she moves to this super small town where her great aunt has recently passed and left her not only her house, but her bakery. In order to keep both of those things, she has to stay in that house and run the bakery for a year. Along with that, she has also inherited her great aunt's giant mastiff baby, who was probably my favorite part of the book. Then, of course, because it is a cozy mystery, a murder takes place in the great aunt's bakery and also a fire to try and cover up said murder. I keep trying to make cozy mysteries work for me, but they're not gonna happen.
Stop trying to make fetch happen. It's not going to happen.
Unfortunately, once again, I felt next to nothing for any of the characters in this story. The romance that happens felt A, so unnecessary, B, completely predictable, and C, based on nothing. Well, no, okay, I actually do feel something about the mystery. I felt like it was predictable. I simply couldn't get over the fact of Maddie as a character. She seems like a little bit more independent version of Alexis from Schitt's Creek. She's also supposed to be in her mid-20s. I simply could not get over that Maddie's aunt left her a note in the form of a VHS, and she doesn't know what a VHS is. Like I said, I also thought the plot was pretty predictable, and I had issues with it in regard to conveniences. For example, Maddie's fingerprints are found on the weapon that was used to stab the victim, but the police chief was best friends with her aunt. So she immediately is like, oh, I know you didn't do this. You've only been here a few days. No suspicion at all, but I'm gonna ask for your help in solving the case. You're not a very good police chief if you're doing that. Maddie is also consistently the one who always uncovers the clues and evidence that's needed, but then conveniently forgets about it until necessary. The final reveal of the perpetrator behind everything was so weird because there's a moment prior to that where Maddie overhears 3 people talking in an office, and she knows one person for a fact who that is. The second she thinks is this person. She's fairly certain it is, but she's not sure. And there's a third voice that she doesn't know who it is. But the perpetrator is the second person. And yet she's so incredibly shocked to find out he's behind all this. But she literally overheard him talking about this conspiracy. Why would she be surprised? I couldn't get over that. I don't know if that was a slip on the author's part, if that was intentional. I'm not really sure. The dialogue also felt pretty stilted, and the hashtags that Maddie utilizes, because also she's sort of an influencer, were really cringy and just were more like the hashtags done 10 years ago, not those of today. I really want to officially give up on cozy mysteries here. They're just not gonna happen for me, unfortunately. This came out to 2 stars on Kyle, and I am bummed. I got this from a little free library, and it will be returning to 1. Also for Summerween, I read Comfort Me with Apples by Catheryne and Valente. This one was for purple on the cover, so I don't remember what the other one was for. This book is following a woman who lives the picture-perfect life in a picture-perfect town until one day she ends up finding some unusual things in her house. I'll just leave it at that. I had heard some pretty divisive things about this book going into it, and so I really was curious to see whether I was gonna like it or not. And because it's so short, it's really easy to give away too much, which is why I just gave you the littlest synopsis possible, because I didn't think I knew too much going into this, but unfortunately I did. The information I had totally ruined the twist of the book, so I could see perfectly where everything was giving us hints to lead to that answer. I don't think that necessarily makes this a bad book. I think if I hadn't known that nugget of information, I probably would have enjoyed it a little bit more and been more surprised by this twist. I probably wouldn't have actually put everything together until that reveal happened. But unfortunately I did have that, and I do think it affected my enjoyment of the story overall. I will admit I did really like Valente's writing though. It flows very beautifully, paints a perfect picture, and the way the story unfolded was actually really well done. And again, if I didn't know that bit of information, I probably wouldn't have picked up on all the evidence she wove throughout the story. But knowing it, I can appreciate the fact that she managed to weave all of those little clues in. The way she writes the setting, because it's very perfect, but it's also kind of too perfect in a creepy way, which is definitely probably where I got the Stepford Wives comparison. I would consider reading more from this author. Unlike some people who I know that were really angered by that twist, I liked it. I think it went in a clever direction, and that's also a theme that I tend to really enjoy in my books. Yeah, unfortunately, this is just a scenario where I didn't know. I had already ruined the book for myself. My Kyle came down to 3 stars, but I I definitely would be willing to check out more of Valente's work. Then next up for my weekly reading vlog, I read Razorblade Tears by 𝗖cie cosby. This was for a book picked off of my physical TBR to fulfill the prompt of a book everybody talks about, because this has been everywhere. Everybody has read this book. I feel like I'm one of the last few who hasn't, but I finally got to it, and I totally understand why everyone was so obsessed with it. I think this would make a phenomenal movie, and I do think it is supposed to be turned into a film. This story is following two fathers whose sons were married to each other and recently were killed in what is believed to be a hate crime, because not only were they gay, but they were also in an interracial relationship. Both of these fathers had a very strange relationship with their son, but now that their sons have been killed, they each try to atone for this by utilizing their criminal backgrounds to find out who did this. Again, I totally get where everybody was coming from with this, because this book is really bingeable. It sucked me in. I read the first half of this book in a single sitting because I did not want to stop listening. I also read the last third in another single sitting because, once again, I couldn't put it down. It was just so incredibly easy to be absorbed into the story. I really liked the camaraderie that grew between these fathers. They come from similar but also very different backgrounds. There's some tension when things start out, not only because of race, but also the fact that they each had such a tumultuous relationship with their sons, and now they can't change that, and it's haunting them. However, the connection between them starts to strengthen as the story continues, and it almost starts to make this book feel like a buddy cop movie, but like also the antithesis of a buddy cop movie, seeing as how they're criminals. There was so much depth to each of their characters and a lot of exploration of the feelings they had, where those feelings came from, how they were processing them, the guilt they felt upon realizing that their son's sexuality was so insignificant in the grand scheme of their lives, and how they allowed something so small to affect their relationships so much. The writing around racism and homophobia in this, as well as the interaction between those two prejudices, was just fantastic. I really applaud Cosby for the writing around those themes. There were some very beautiful, poignant lines as well. What's really weird though in the writing here is it goes back and forth between that, then this very cut and dry, he said this, he said that, he did this, he did that. Though the book itself was very fast paced, and some of the more violent scenes were really gory and I could not look away from. So on one hand, the writing was really weird, but because of the fast pace and the way I was so wrapped up in the story, I didn't mind it too much, but whenever I would take notice of it, it did kind of take me out. One other issue, and I don't really know if I can even quite call it an issue that I had with this book, is I guessed every major plot element that took place at the end. Everything that you could constitute a twist or a reveal, I figured it out. I figured it out as soon as a tiny bit of evidence was presented. I wasn't flabbergasted by the end of this book, but once more, I was so wrapped up in these fathers getting their retribution that I didn't even really care. I just wanted to see them finally succeed. I'm really glad I finally got around to this book because it is a very engaging ride, but it wasn't a perfect thriller. So in the end, my cop pile for this came down to 4 stars, but I do still highly recommend it and will be one of those people singing its praises just like everybody else has been. Next is volume 9 of Spy Family by Tatsuya Endo. I absolutely adore this family so freaking much, and I'm sure you've probably heard me talk about this previously, but if you haven't, this is following a spy named Twilight who is determined to get close to his mark, but in order to do so, he has to create a fake family. So he enlists the help of a little girl who turns out to be a telepath, and hires a woman to be his wife who turns out to be an assassin. Unfortunately for Twilight, he does not know that she is an assassin, nor that the daughter is a telepath, and it is so much fun. This one specifically is the second half of an arc following the family when they go on a cruise. You really get to see some of the mom Yor being a true badass, and I loved it. It was so much fun. But you also get to see some of the wholesome family feels with Twilight, or Lloyd as his undercover name, and Anya the daughter, which also just has my heart over the moon. The last few missions or issues in this are more side pieces, little fluff. So I didn't quite give this one 5 stars. It did come out to like 4.5 though. Still loving it, still having so much fun. As I mentioned in my vlog, I know some people are complaining about the fact that the plot hasn't really evolved as much as you would expect, but I'm here for a good time, not for the plot. One may as well talk about volume 8 real fast, which I did give 5 stars and is the first part of that cruise ship plot is so much fun. Like I said, I love seeing Yor being a true badass, but I also love seeing Lloyd and Anya's relationship improving. That's like literally all this one is. It's so stinking cute. This one was a glowing 5 stars. Finally, the best book I read this month has to go to Systems Collapse by Martha Wells, the most recent book in the Murderbot Diaries series, and it was so much fun. If you somehow haven't heard about this series, majority of it is a novella series in which we are following a security unit known as Murderbot, who has actually hacked its government module, meaning it doesn't have to do what the government tells it, but it chooses so because it makes its life easier. In between doing all of these stupid missions and working with all these annoying humans, it gets to watch as much media as it wants. This is the second full-length novel in the series, and once more we are seeing Murderbot begrudgingly having to work with humans. Also, by extension, becoming more human themselves. The things that made me so over the moon with Murderbot in this one specifically are its anxiety and feelings of inadequacy, which is just so unexpected from a AI being, but it once again reinforces that Murderbot is becoming more humanoid as the story progresses. And then their anger about feeling those things, because feelings are for humans and they are not a human, just makes my heart soar. I adored their interactions with Art, a different AI that we were introduced to earlier in the series. I love those two. Every one of their interactions make me so happy. There's also a supporting cast of different characters we've met throughout the series that I liked as well. I really enjoyed seeing one of Murderbot's humans and one of Art humans in particular interacting. That was interesting, and to see those interactions through Murderbot's eyes were so fun. One of my major complaints I've had throughout the series is oftentimes I feel like Wells gives too big a cast, and thankfully that didn't happen here. It felt like a very manageable amount of people to keep track of. And while off of the last novella, I was kind of hoping the series would start taking more of a sci-fi mystery direction, I did actually really enjoy the adventure in this one. And ironically, definitely hit on some similar themes from the first Star Wars book that I read this month, so that made me really happy. This is the best book I read this month, glowing 5 stars. I thought there was supposed to be more in the series last time I checked Goodreads, but recently when I looked again, this is listed as the last book. And so I need to know, are we getting more? All right, y'all, so that is it for today. Thank you so much for coming to my channel. I really appreciate it. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, leave me a robot emoji in the comments down below. Also, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. I have all my socials as well as a few ways you can support me linked in the description. I come out videos on Monday and Friday, but until then, I hope you continue to have a terrific day. Love you, bye!